All right, welcome back, folks, to day 3 with your rabbits. So today we are going to be looking at the abdominal cavity and specifically spending time with the digestive system. So this one is fairly easy because, as we talked about before, you already had an opening here that had been sutured up and we cut out those sutures. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at that spot and cut up with our scissors. We don't even need our scalpel, but don't go all the way to the previous edge. Instead, just before you get there, start cutting down. The reason for this is we want to try to keep the diaphragm intact. Okay, we're also going to be cutting down that way and then across this way so that we can open up the abdominal cavity as a single flap. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the other side and I'll see you in a sec. All right, folks, so I have completed those cuts. We have our flaps of abdominal wall laying on either side, and we do have this ring of tissue here that is preserving our diaphragm for us. Now, I will go ahead and say up front, this is not a pretty thing in here. This particular specimen is fairly dried out, so it's all pressed together. So we are going to have a little bit of difficulty looking at it, but we'll do our best. So, to begin with, this is our superior portion, or rather our anterior portion, because we are a four-legged creature here, so anterior and then posterior down this way, and these here are our liver. Underneath that, this should be the stomach, and then all of this here is the intestines. So what we're going to do to start out with is we're going to try to just lift up the liver here, and you can see there's lots of lobes, and we will see what we see here. Okay, and I do see the gallbladder, but it's almost the same color as everything else because everything is so dried out. I'm going to go ahead and try to point him up a little bit. So you can see all of these lobes here are the liver, okay? Then, these are fairly firm, but there is this here, which you can see is very squishy compared to the rest of these structures. This is the gallbladder, okay? So this is the gallbladder that does sit on the liver. Our gallbladder also sits underneath the liver. Ours is inferior to the liver here. Theirs is posterior to the liver. And usually it's much greener, but because everything is dried out, it's more of this gray color, okay? And then underneath all of this liver tissue, this is the stomach, and this is very hard. So this guy had a pretty good meal before he died. And so we can definitely tell that there's a lot of stuff in here we're going to be finding pretty soon. So just to expedite things, because we are having a poor time visualizing, I'm going to start pulling out the lobes of the liver, okay? So essentially, I want to do this with my fingers to try to not break other structures, but I'm going to just kind of carefully get my finger underneath and lightly add traction, and there we go. That is almost all of the liver, not all of it, but a large portion of it, and we can see a little bit better here that this is the gallbladder, and the rest of these are very firm in comparison. That is liver. Okay, so I'm just going to put that off to the side, and looking here, we do have a few other structures that are very visible, and wow, this stomach is super full. We will see what happened here. I'm just kind of cutting some of that connective tissue fascia. And so this is all stomach, and this is another lobe of the liver that broke off from the rest, and we just want to get in here to see. Okay, so here's our diaphragm. You can see the diaphragm really nicely now, and in the diaphragm we have our esophagus. So I'm kind of breaking up the tissue that's holding the esophagus, and I am going to break through the diaphragm a little bit here so we can see the tissue a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just bisect that the rest of the way. Okay. So now our thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity are continuous, but in doing so, I'm going to pull some of that lung back. We can now see the esophagus as it travels through the thoracic cavity and into the stomach. Okay, so it was running behind the trachea the whole way. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off these lungs. We looked at them last time. We don't need them anymore. And you can see here, I'm going to actually stick the probe into the trachea. So there the probe is in the trachea, and there is the esophagus running behind it. So remember, the trachealis muscle is on the back side of the trachea and attaches to the esophagus, so that when you're swallowing, it has the ability to push into the trachea a little bit to give it some more space for your bolus to go down. And so because of that, that can cause choking if your bolus is too large and gets stuck. Okay? So we could follow this all the way up into the mouth, but that's a little more work than I think we can accomplish today. So what we are going to do is go ahead and release the rest of this fascia on the stomach. And there we go. Okay, so it's a big stomach. So we can see the esophagus going into the stomach here, and we see the duodenum coming off of the stomach here, okay? So this is that portion. Before we get too far though, I do want to point out behind the stomach here was the spleen, okay? The spleen sits behind the stomach, all right? And I want to get back in here just a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna pull that out. So that is just a little bit more liver that didn't come out. But this here is the pancreas. Okay, the pancreas was also behind the stomach and not easily visible. And actually, this is a blood clot, and that blood clot was inside of the abdominal aorta. Okay, so we broke open the aorta when we were pulling that stuff out. So this is the pancreas that was sitting back here with the spleen behind the stomach. Okay, so let's from here be looking at our intestines. Now, I'm going to go ahead. You guys can maybe see this. This is a thin tissue here. You guys, can you see that? All right, so it's a very thin, transparent tissue, but what's really important about it is you see those slightly darker webs that are in there. That is blood vessels, okay? So all of this tissue in between the intestines is called the mesentery. The mesentery has blood vessels and actually nerves and different things that are going to and from the intestines, so that the intestines have blood and nutrition and everything, but also so that they can take nutrition away from the intestines, okay? Now, it's important we look at this now, because as we continue through, we're going to break all of this. It's very delicate stuff. But if you guys remember your blood vessels, you had your superior mesentery artery and your inferior mesentery artery. So those mesentery arteries are feeding all of this mesentery tissue. So all of these little vessels are vessels off of those mesentery arteries. Okay? And it's one big loop. The inferior and the superior loop around through all of these vessels and are going to give blood flow. Okay? So, what we do now is what we call the running of the bowels. So, we very carefully are just going to continue from the duodenum here, the first part of the small intestine, and we're going to keep pulling and pulling until we get all the way down to the rectum, or we break it like that. And that as I said, this is a very dry one, so I am expecting that the tissue will be very friable like that. All right, so we're not going to do too well today. We will see if I can find a better one at some point, but unfortunately this is kind of messed up. So I'm just going to grab another section and pull and see if we can follow it around. But as you guys can see, if you do break it, it's not like it's a huge deal. You just need to find another area and just keep pulling and separating as much as you can without breaking. And I want you guys just to see this. All this flattened stuff here, it originally looked like it was just one blob, but you can see all of that really nice mesentery vessels there. Like that is perfect, okay? And so this is still all part of the small intestine. And we're probably in the ileum or jejunum at some point in there. I'm just going to try to keep pulling lightly. And we didn't exactly get there directly, but then this here is the colon. It's going down here to be part of the rectum. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, here we go. So it broke off somewhere in here. So this is all large intestine here. And let's see, that might be where it broke off. I can't say for certain, but we have this larger diameter portion here, and this larger diameter portion, that is the cecum. Okay, the cecum is the portion in between where the small intestine and the large intestine come together. And we as humans have a cecum as well, but it is proportionally smaller than the cecum of the rabbit. And it also is the place where the appendix comes off, which I'm not seeing very well here. But as I said, this is very friable tissue, and so we may have lost it. That's another really good shot of the mesentery there. That's very nice. Okay. So essentially here, I think that's the best we're going to do on our running of the bowels. So I'm not going to get too caught up on this, but what I do want you to take note of, we can see our spleen and our pancreas there really nicely. What we're going to do next is I'd like you to snip a piece of your stomach and push out some of the contents, and then snip down here on your colon and push out some of the contents and compare the two and see what it looks like. And I think that's it for today.